when we talk about Labour's success as a political party, a lot of it's very much focused on the national picture. And I will definitely agree with anyone. At the moment, the national picture of Labour and its successors doesn't paint a very good one. Definitely not. I think Keir Starmer definitely needs to get out there. Need to be telling people, this is what Labour is, this is what we intend to do, this is why you should vote for us. And at the moment, he is not doing that. There's obviously the cause of the coronavirus that has been very much the excuse from the National that, let's deal with that first, then we'll talk about policies. But ultimately, this should always be at the very heart of what the National should be. However, while the national portrait of Labour doesn't, shall we say, look that particularly well good at the moment, because let's face it, it's still being, shall we say, painted, the more local brand of Labour, meaning its municipalities, its local regional mayors, have been doing an absolute fantastic job. People like Andy Burnham and Dan Jarvis, who have been local mayors probably for the longest during that time, have been doing stellar work in their constituencies, pushing forward for changes in Greater Manchester and, of course, here in South Yorkshire. We've seen Andy Burnham strike out and take bus ownership into a local level so that essentially the richer, more successful routes subsidise the less used routes and even have weekend buses. You know, I'm not that old, but I've never heard of just a weekend service before in that type of thing. But I know people a lot older than me will know about the whole weekend bus schedule and that how it was important to having weekend buses. And infrastructure itself and transport is important because this is one of the ways that you get people to and from work. So if Labour is to continue on its have a very successful, then the national board has to look at the very successful picture that is happening and being painted at the local levels by these leaders and now transfer it to the national level. And I think that is possible. But they just have to take that leap and they have to be brave about it. So, but before we do that and jump into that, please do remember to have a little, please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button. I don't know. But also, yes, links down below to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do support the channel that way. And of course, please do keep on wearing your masks out there, especially if you are in the UK, and think about social distancing because the virus is still very much out there. So let's get on with today's story. So this comes from The Guardian, and the title is Labour's local successors show there is a path forward if the National Party dares to take it. As Labour's general election defeats have mounted, it has become the common to fear that the party will never hold office again. And there are reasons to think that this pessimism is very much overdone. The volatility of our electoral system, the government's accumulating problems, and the ageing voters whom it increasingly relies on. But another reason not to despair quite yet is really the introduction into the panicky debate about Labour's future, away from Westminster, in regions such as the north of England, where its crisis is supposed to be the deepest. The party is still in office in lots of places, in both traditionally local government institutions and new ones created by devolution. In a small but growing number of these places, Labour is doing innovative and popular things with the power that it has. Some of these islands of radicalism are relatively well known, such as the Preston model, a Labour's council's revival of a once struggling Lancashire city by getting its main institutions to spend a lot more of their money locally. Other ambitious Labour administrations such as Salford, North Ayrshire and the north of Tyne combined authority are also beginning to attract attention beyond their localities. By pursuing expansive policies, by opening more public libraries, building large numbers of council homes, and investing in green new businesses. Meanwhile, the already high-profile but previously quietly cautious Labour mayors, such as Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan, have become a lot bolder, particularly in their policies to reduce air pollution and improve public transport. Despite Labour's sagging national popularity since 2017, all these local strongholds it supports have been incredibly resilient or even increased. Is it just the beginning of something important, or is it just a few minor fightbacks at a declining party? Skeptics about Labour's prospects have plenty of reasons to think the latter. In the centralised Britain, local government has been losing power and funding for decades, particularly since 2010, as it suffered the worst of the Conservatives' austerity. And under Keir Starmer, Labour hasn't been able or even willing to use its local successes as evidence of its ability to run the country. A party that is damagingly short of national policies and which recently launched a new policy review to find some, appears largely uninterested in the promising experiments of its municipality wing. In statements by Starmer and even his shadow ministers, achievements by these innovators even rarely feature. This disconnect tells us two very important things about the state of the party, and also about our wider politics. Starmer's very vulnerable position as the leader makes it very risky for him to publicise the achievements of currently far more effective local Labour politicians, much as the ambitious Burnham. Most of the party's mayors and council leaders are also to the left of Starmer, or at least in the version of Starmer permitted by his centrist advisers. They are also more interested in redistributing power and resources locally than looking respectable for the Tory press or trying to appease increasingly right-wing ex-Labour voters. This boldness particularly explains what happened to many of the new ideas generated by the left during Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Some of that energy has either lingered in or been transferred to Britain's town and city halls. Yet, with Corbynism now increasingly treated by Labour as an aberration, its ideas, how successful they may have been locally, appeared to be largely off limits to Starmer. The municipality radicals seem undeterred, however. The leader of Preston Council, Matthew Brown, and the mayor of Salford, Paul Dennett, have written occasional articles about what Labour nationally could learn from their work. But they also have a strong air of independence, and in a recent book co-authored by Brown and the left-wing writer Rance E. Jones, Paint Your Town Red, which makes modern municipality socialism seem very seductively achievable. There is a section titled Solving Problems from Below Without Permission from Above. In some ways, these local leaders have seceded from mainstream politics with its Westminster fixation. Yet, that may be their most radical step of all. Yet, they have also learned to exploit the Conservatives' carelessness in lawmaking. Browns and Jones argue that the new mayorals and the combined authorities were cynically introduced by the Tories since 2010 as an attempt to try and devolve the blame for austerity, and they have inevitably proved amenable to many left-wing politicians. The new structures have promoted them to form new regional alliances and to think afresh. This picture paints a kind of very guerrilla government by the local left and is very appealing in an era of Tory domination and general Labour toothlessness. But as a long-term strategy, it may even have its limits. A similar but larger scale left-wing experiment took place at the Greater London Council between 1981 and 1986 during Margaret Thatcher's premiership. The GLC had originally been created by the Tories to loosen Labour's hold on the capital by extending London's boundaries to include more right-wing suburbs. Yet, during the 80s, a left-wing Labour administration led by Ken Livingstone took control and found legislative loopholes that enabled it to increase and redirect the GDL's spending in radical directions. With a little help from a cautious Labour leadership, rather like today's, the GLC supported multiculturalism and minority rights in pioneering and eventually even very influential ways. But its radicalism also enraged and threatened the Conservatives. They tried to abolish it. And the current government is not yet struggling with today's left-wing mayoralties and councils to be abolished. But days after Labour's success in this year's mayoral elections, the Tories confirmed their plans to change the voting system for electing mayors to prove very disadvantaged for Labour candidates. Even more so than Thatcher, this government is intent on a rival centres of powers. For anyone wanting the city halls and radicals to rescue Labour, there are also potential problems to scale as well. It is relatively easy for bold politicians to win control locally in elections when turnouts tend to be low, and far more polarised voters are more influential. It does not think to go from good press for shaking up a town from local newspapers that may welcome the experiment but are often fairly neutral in regards. But national politics is ferocious, and its media bias towards conservatism and very fickle swing voters is a completely different business. Yet, for Labour to recover nationally and to remain useful in power locally, close cooperation between these two sides of the party may be one of the few viable strategies. Labour's recent announcement in government that it would ask public bodies to give more contracts to British businesses on the more condition that those businesses help improve their social environment and labour practices, both policies are echoing parts of the Preston model. It may be a sign that Starmer is finally beginning to pay attention to the municipality revolutions taking place under his very nose. If not, the lives of those revolutions may be very short and lonely. So, ultimately, I think these are good practices for us to follow. And I think that if Starmer is actually very serious about following that and looking closely in that, then I think we could have some very, very good successes in the future. And like I say, the Tories are looking at their current electoral strategy relies on a very aging population that is going to get less and less. And we have seen that the younger people are a lot more focusing on Labour, and they are a lot more radical in their voting. They're a lot more energised. And as they start to move into voting age and being able to vote, this changes the game completely. And as I've said, at the next election, Boris Johnson is going to have to walk a very, very tight tightrope by trying to appeal to his more traditional southern base and not alienate his north, while trying to, again, appeal to his northern base while not alienating his southern base. And that could be a very, very interesting general election. But as I say, we have to see what policies Starmer comes up with. But if he looks at what's going on in this, the local revolutions, this could be very, very good and very, very successful for a strategy for Labour to follow. So it's all, as always, up in the air, but we have to see. And as I always say, if you're part of a local Labour party, shout about it. If your locality, if your town, like you're in Preston, is having successes, I urge you, get on YouTube, talk about it. If you're from Preston and you're a Labour councillor and you want to talk about your successes, come and talk to me. I'll have you on one of my Wednesday morning, not Wednesday morning live streams, but I'll have you on my Wednesday live streams. Tell me about it. I want to hear about it, because I want to hear stuff about what's going on around from different Labour councillors around the country. I would love to know more about this. So if you are a Labour councillor from Preston and you want to shout more about this, I'd be more than happy for you to come on stream sometime. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share and subscribe button on your way out. And of course, down below there are links to me on my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can help buy me a coffee. And as always, please do remember to keep wearing your masks out there and think about social distancing, because the virus is still very much out there. And of course, thank you all for watching, and we'll see you all next time.